Hello there, Joshua Johnson speaking. It's great to be with you on this Thursday, June 16th. And tonight, we're taking your questions about the latest January 6th hearing. Today's focus, Mike Pence. The committee laid out evidence showing how the former president set the mob against his vice president.
Make no mistake about the fact that the vice president's life was in danger.
We will recap today's testimony and consider a future witness with unique ties to the Supreme Court. European leaders visited Ukraine in a show of support. They made it clear that the country is now a candidate to join the European Union. Also, Elon Musk met Twitter's staff for the first time. What did he say? And how did they respond on Slack? Plus, drag queen story hours are dealing with more threats these days. You'll meet the group's executive director just ahead. On January 6th, everyone working at the U.S. Capitol was in danger. Today's hearing clarified just how much danger the former vice president was in. It seems that some rioters were absolutely willing to hang Mike Pence just for doing his job.
What the president wanted the vice president to do was not just wrong. It was illegal and unconstitutional.
We are fortunate for Mr. Pence's courage on January 6th. Our democracy came dangerously close to catastrophe.
Make no mistake about the fact that the vice president's life was in danger. A recent court filing by the Department of Justice explains that a confidential informant from the Proud Boys told the FBI that the Proud Boys would have killed Mike Pence if given a chance.
And that chance very nearly came. The committee says rioters got within 40 feet of Mr. Pence when the Secret Service escorted him to a secure location. 40 feet. Pence is the yellow dot, the rioters are the blue dot. But despite the danger, he apparently refused to leave the Capitol. Today, his former legal counsel, Greg Jacob, explained why.
I could hear the din of the rioters in the building while we moved, but I don't think I was aware that they were as close as that. The vice president did not want to take any chance that the world would see the vice president of the United States fleeing the United States Capitol. He was determined that we would complete the work that we had set out to do that day.
Mike Pence was not the only main character of today's narrative. The other was John Eastman, a conservative lawyer and former professor. He had been urging President Trump to oppose certifying the election. The committee said that Dr. Eastman knew his arguments were bunk, but pushed them anyway. As the vice president was being evacuated, attorney Greg Jacobs emailed Eastman. The email's last sentence kind of sums up the thesis of today's hearing. Quote, "Thanks to your BS, we are now under siege." Unquote. Another witness was retired federal judge Michael Luttig, a noted conservative jurist. His pace was slow, but his point was clear.
Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger to American democracy.
Let's answer your questions about today's hearing with NBC News national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, a progressive legal think tank, and Philip Bump, a national correspondent for The Washington Post. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you all with us. And Philip, let me start with you. I wonder what the reaction was like today to what we heard. Granted, we knew that Mike Pence's life had been in danger. We heard the crowds chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." But in terms of having this goofy series of legal theories laid out in such detail, what have some of the early reactions been like in Washington?
I think there are two main things that I think people are really seizing on today. The first is the fact that Eastman himself appears to have been largely insincere when he was advocating for Mike Pence to do this extraordinary thing on January 6th, that they uncovered this document from back in October when he would, when you go into a Word document and you make a correction to it, you could see his correction from John Eastman basically debunking the idea that he would later promulgate to the White House. But then there was the extent to which Trump was apparently cognizant of the extent to which he was putting Mike Pence in danger, that he knew, according to the testimony today and some of the taped interviews that were shown, he knew that the Capitol was already facing a violent riot at the time that he tweeted that tweet about Mike Pence shortly after 2 o'clock on January 6th. And that actually preceded that incident that you showed where he was only 40 feet from the rioters. So Mike Pence was in danger in that moment, very specific danger because of Donald Trump, which is something that we didn't really understand the extent of prior to today.
Elizabeth Wydra, one of the clips we heard today came from a former White House counsel talking about his conversations with Dr. Eastman after Dr. Eastman had suggested sending election results back to the states. Here's part of that testimony. Watch.
He started to ask me about something dealing with Georgia and preserving something potentially for appeal. And I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Right? I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it. And then I hung up on him.
That's Eric Hirschman describing his conversation with John Eastman before hanging up on him. Elizabeth Wydra, what was your sense of the value of laying out this character behind the scenes, John Eastman, that I think maybe a lot of people might not have known much about, or maybe had heard about just tangentially? What do you think was the value in terms of what the committee wanted to do in making him a main character?
I think that it was very powerful to have Trump's inner circle, who pushed back on Dr. Eastman's theories, testify today about how his theories were completely bogus and how John Eastman himself knew that they were bogus. I think a theme throughout these hearings thus far have been Trump knew he lost the election, and yet he still went out and said he won. Trump knew there were no election fraud claims that had any merit to them. We heard Bill Barr debunk that himself. And yet he continued to go out and say that there were election fraud claims that he was pursuing. And today we heard that he had a person who was willing to give him this theory of how Mike Pence could overturn the vote of the people. But even he and Dr. Eastman knew that it was bunk. And yet they still went out and said it, and not just said it, but said it in a way that would inflame the crowd and put Mike Pence's life in danger. And so I think it was really helpful to just have these unimpeachable conservative voices. You know, these aren't Democratic progressive law professors critiquing this. You know, Judge Michael Luttig, you don't really get much more conservative than Judge Luttig. And he was out there saying that this had absolutely no merit whatsoever, and he would lay down his body before he would let Mike Pence overturn the vote of the people based on that kind of theory. And I thought that was extremely powerful.
Frank Figliuzzi, we learned from the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, was asked about it, and he said the prosecutors are listening, and they have asked the committee to send them basically all their deposition documents right away. Clearly, they're paying attention to all of this. Give me your sense of how all of this plays into the Department of Justice's activities, especially since there are already a lot of prosecutions that are moving. There are a number of prosecutions that have already secured pleas or convictions.
Yeah, even today we learned that the Department of Justice has once again, in writing, asked the committee for all of its transcripts. And this is tied to a Proud Boys, in part to a Proud Boys prosecution going on in the district right now. So look, the hearings so far have been quite adept at depriving Trump and those around him of any semblance of a defense against potential criminal charges, that they were relying on legitimate legal possibilities, theories. They've been debunked, particularly today. So I think DOJ has the groundwork here. The foundation has been laid. I'm not saying that they get this all from the committee. I think they've been working diligently themselves. We know there are multiple grand juries sitting. on these matters right now, but the framework for a prosecution is there. And what I've been saying is, look, if this happened at any town in America, say a city manager was being pressured to make a decision, an official act, being told, under pain of death to you, your family, we're going to destroy your reputation publicly, your career is over, as really President Trump was doing to his own vice president, the FBI would open that case. The U.S. attorney would prosecute as corruption, coercion, extortion. Yet we seem to be wringing our hands when we see the evidence that it's happening at the highest level in our nation. I think DOJ is going to address it.
Frank, let me stick with you for 1 second. People from around the world watch what happened on that day. And for people who are watching these proceedings now in other parts of the world who may not fully understand the nuances of U.S. law, I think it's a fair question to ask where the line is, right? Presidents say all kinds of things. Politicians say all kinds of things. Talk about what the bar is like in terms of John Eastman, former President Trump, and at what point it goes from being just bogus, from being problematic, to being legally actionable. Where is that line? Do we even know?
Yeah, well, it has to do with intent. It has to do with the mindset. And so you start, all cases really, unless you have videotape or audio tape of someone saying, I'm about to do something criminal. And by the way, we're pretty darn close to that here. We may get there before the hearings are over, but you prove intent by circumstances. And you demonstrate that someone was told repeatedly by the subject matter experts, by the way, including the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, back then, that there isn't any fraud, right? And now we heard today that there's really no basis for any legal method of not certifying the Electoral College results. When you do that, witness after witness after witness, and a jury sits and listens to that, there is really no other conclusion that the defendants intended to do something illegal. We have Eastman even, we learned today, requesting to be put on a pardon list. You don't request to be put on a pardon list unless you think you've done something illegal.
Philip Bump, we know that there was one hearing postponed this week that we thought was going to focus on President Trump's pressure campaign regarding the Attorney General to replace the Attorney General. Talk about how this hearing that we had today fits into the rest of what we're expecting to hear from the committee. They have said from the beginning that what we're going to hear in this series of hearings is not every little thing that they have and that they're still doing more investigating. But how does this lock together with everything else we're expecting?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is that the mandate of the committee is not simply to investigate what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, but more broadly, what happened at the Capitol plus all of the things that led up to it. And I think one of the things the committee is doing, sort of quietly, although they're overt about it at points, is that they're describing the multiple paths that Donald Trump was trying to take toward securing a second term in office despite his loss. The Capitol riot being just one of the truncating points of one of those paths. There are a lot of other paths, and so the hearing earlier this week was supposed to deal with the fact that he briefly considered replacing the Attorney General, the acting Attorney General at the time, in order to put more pressure on Georgia to send an alternate slate of electors. So that's an example of a different path that they're articulating. So that's how this all fits together. What they're trying to do is they are trying to say, here is how Donald Trump tried to steal democracy. Here's how he tried to steal a second term in office, with the intent of both, A, having Americans who don't accept that thesis actually accept it based on the evidence, but secondarily to be able to provide to Congress and to law enforcement a playbook to say, hey, look, here's how we keep this from happening again. You heard Judge Ludwig say that today, that there still exists this clear and present threat. If that threat exists, one must need to try and address that threat. And part of what the committee is trying to do is show how that threat can be addressed.
We're speaking to Philip Bump, Elizabeth Wydra, and Frank Figluzzi about today's hearing and a series of hearings from the January 6th committee. Y'all sit tight. We're going to continue with our panel in just a moment. But first, you may or may not know this, today marks 7 years since this happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
On this date in 2015, Donald Trump descended that now famous golden escalator at Trump Tower in New York to announce his run for president. And today, during the January 6th hearing, we are examining more of his final days in office. We would love to hear from you, more of your thoughts about the hearing or any of our stories tonight. You can email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Be sure to tell us your name and where you live, or leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. We would love to hear from you. Still to come, the January 6th committee could soon hear from a unique witness, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. We'll tell you why and get to your questions in just a minute. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. We learned a lot today about former President Trump's attorney, John Eastman. He advised the president on keeping Congress from certifying the election. Reports from the Washington Post and the New York Times both indicate that the January 6th House Committee has emails between Dr. Eastman and Ginni Thomas. Virginia Thomas is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Mrs. Thomas reportedly pushed former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to help overturn the election. Today, the January 6th committee announced it wants her to testify. She told the conservative outlet The Daily Caller that she looks forward to doing so and that she can't wait to, in her words, clear up misconceptions. Let's continue now with Frank Figluzzi, Elizabeth Wydra, and Philip Bump. And Philip, since you are with the Washington Post, one of the publications that put this report out, tell us more about Ginni Thomas's significance in all of this. She's not a public official. She is a well-known conservative activist and advocate. Where might she fit into all of this?
Honestly, that's the question. We've known for years, obviously, Ginni Thomas, someone who's very active in conservative politics, in right-wing politics more broadly, I think it's safe to say. She and her husband, Clarence Thomas, have been pretty adamant that they try and keep a wall between what she does and what he does. But that has really started to erode, I think it's safe to say, when we consider what happened in the aftermath of the election. We know, for example, that she was sending text messages to Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's chief of staff, sort of urging him to keep up the fight and trying to get the sort of the inner scoop on things. She participated in this sort of bulk email, one of these activism campaigns where you send emails to legislators. She emailed a bunch of legislators in Arizona trying to advocate for them to help overturn the election. The Washington Post reported yesterday that she reached out also to John Eastman. We learned later this afternoon from Eastman himself that request appears to have been to appear for some sort of speaking function, according to Eastman. Obviously, there are materials that the committee has, which we don't necessarily know what they say yet, so that may not be the entire story. But you know, and she was at the rally at the Ellipse on January 6th. So Ginni Thomas has her fingers in a lot of different aspects of what the committee is looking at, and so it seems very natural they would want to seek more information from her.
We've already seen some of the emails that Ginni Thomas sent to Mark Meadows. Here are a few of the ones that she sent soon after, like around the time of the election, well before January 6th. November 6, 2020, she texted, "Do not concede. It takes time for the army who is gathering for his back." November 10th, she texted, "The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history." And also on November 10th, "Help this great president stand firm." She also referred to the greatest heist of our history. Elizabeth Wydra, how does this fit into what we've already seen from people who were, frankly, much closer inside the president's orbit and who presumably would have had even more impact than Ginni Thomas?
I think obviously it's important because she is connected. She's married to a Supreme Court justice. And if, for example, John Eastman's theory of how Mike Pence could have subverted the will of the people and not certify the electoral votes, if that had gone to the Supreme Court, it would be extremely relevant that she had been trying to support this constitutional coup. But I think even if we don't add that aspect into it, what we see from Ginni Thomas's involvement is just how broadly and deeply this criminal conspiracy to overturn the election results in 2020 goes. You know, this isn't just about the violence at the Capitol on January 6th, although that is, of course, an extremely powerful and important part of the story. And we heard today, you know, these harrowing details about how Mike Pence was basically 40 feet away from a mob chanting about his murder. But there's also this broader conspiracy or push or whatever label you want to put on it to undermine the vote of the people, undermine the ability of the American people to choose their own leaders. And from the text that we've seen and the emails, it seems like a very prominent national figure like Ginni Thomas was all in on that effort. And that is important not just to the story of the 2020 election, but also the ongoing threat that was alluded to in Judge Ludig's closing remarks today in his testimony, that there is still a clear and present danger from Trump and his allies, like apparently Ginni Thomas, who are ready, willing, and unfortunately, especially after some of these recent primaries, potentially able to go even further in the 2024 election if there isn't accountability for what happened in 2020. And that's in many ways what these January 6th hearings are about. And then also structural changes made, both to the structure of how we oversee elections and also voting rights themselves.
Let me get to a few viewer questions, because that issue of what happens now is very much at the heart of what a lot of people have been writing about, quite frankly, some of them rather pessimistically, in terms of what would happen from here. Sherry called in and left this in our inbox. Listen.
Even before I listened to the hearings, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Donald J. Trump is directly responsible for the insurrection that occurred in our nation's capital on January 6th. And I believe that the accountability should go to the highest possible level.
Sherry, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. With regard to accountability, Kay Sharpies tweeted, findings so far. Yeah, they were saying this back in 2021. What are you going to do about it? Questions. What are the consequences of attempting a coup? What are the odds those consequences are actually going to happen based on our current government? Frank Figluzzi, I think that's kind of the issue. Everybody that I've talked to about this has been like, yeah, I'm watching the hearings. Yeah, I know what's happening. Yes, they're very important, but so what? Like, we have no idea what it would look like to hold all the people responsible, truly accountable for this so that it can't happen again. It is at best a series of constitutional questions, and at worst, kind of a political exercise that may or may not yield anything. So where do we go with accountability?
I understand the frustration out there, and there are days when I'm as frustrated as some of your viewers are that write in. I think the first thing we have to understand is that, and I'm speaking from 25 years of investigative experience at the FBI, you don't build a case like this overnight. We now have well over 800 Americans who have been indicted for their role, their participation in the violent mob on January 6th at the Capitol. We now have charges, very serious charges, of seditious conspiracy against leadership of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. We now know that there are grand juries sitting in the District of Columbia looking writ large at who planned and coordinated the violence that day, as well as investigations regarding attempts to overturn the election and alternate slates of electors. That's happening. It's going on. We know that. The big call that everybody's waiting for, will the highest level people end up indicted or charged in some way? This is going to be the toughest decision that Attorney General Merrick Garland ever has to make in his long, storied career. And he's got to weigh justice, the interest of justice, against what's best for the country, politically or not. But look, what I keep telling people is the first name of Justice Department is justice, and justice merits charging people no matter who they are.
Before we go, I just want to get to our one last comment from Virginia, who tweeted, why can't Mike Pence acknowledge that his actions on January 6th were honorable and probably saved our republic? Is it modesty or fear of the MAGA mob? I have never been a fan of VP Pence, but I am so thankful that on that awful day, he became a better man. NBC News national security analyst Frank Figluzzi, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and Philip Bump of the Washington Post. Appreciate y'all making time for us tonight. Thank you very much. Coming up, an update on the war in Ukraine that's got some in the U.S. very worried. A number of American families say their loved ones have disappeared there. How might the State Department help find missing veterans in a war zone? That's just ahead. Stay close. Russia is keeping up its assault on eastern Ukraine. The governor of the Luhansk region there says airstrikes killed 4 people today. Russian forces have taken over as much as 80% of the city of Severodonetsk. Today, midnight trains brought key European leaders to Kyiv, just a few hundred miles from the front. You can see there the leaders of France, Germany, and Italy toured ruins in Ukraine. Air raid sirens blared as they surveyed the destruction of Irpin, a suburb of Kyiv. NBC foreign correspondent Ali Arouzi has more for us from Kyiv. Hey, Ali.
Hey, Joshua. So the leaders of France, Germany, and Italy made a visit here to Kyiv today to meet with President Zelensky. They took an overnight train to come to the capital in a show of solidarity with Ukraine. But Ukrainians here are worried that this is just a photo op and some symbolism, and they want some real action from them. Look, they had a press conference with Zelensky. They pledged support, but that hasn't really materialized here from those two countries. The Germans have promised the Ukrainians tanks, which they haven't delivered, and President Macron's comments in the past have gone down very badly here. Comments about it taking possibly decades for Ukraine to join the European Union, and comments about Vladimir Putin not having to be humiliated. So these are not the most popular people here, and they want to see action from them and not words. President Zelensky just recently said that the European leaders have talked about Ukraine being part of the European family. It's now time to put those words into action. So they're going to be really looking to see if they deliver on some of the stuff they said today. And of course, it's weapons that these guys really need here to fight off the Russians. They got $1 billion worth of aid from the US, but the Ukrainians are saying that's just simply not enough. They're saying on the eastern front that the Russians are using something like 50,000 shells a day to move their front line forward. And those 36,000 rounds of ammunition that the US has promised them just isn't going to last very long. I had an opportunity today to speak to President Zelensky's former defense minister. Let's take a listen to what he had to say. I mean, I saw amongst the list, the aid was, 36,000 rounds of 150 millimeter ammunition.
Yeah.
That's not going to last a long time in the Donbass.
No, it's going to last. We do several thousand a day, so of course not. But again, we need to understand that not all information was announced from yesterday's meeting, because some countries provided us weapons and they're not publicly announced yet. So we will receive a substantial amount of equipment from yesterday's commitments. Some of the commitments which were made previous months, they are not still delivered. That's another problem of timing of the delivery. But generally speaking, if we are talking about the volumes, if we resolve MLRS, if we finally resolve the howitzers, we should be there, but not yet.
And but he was saying in that interview I had with him, Zaharodnyuk, he said that what they really need are these MLRSs, those rocket systems, and the U.S. has pledged to give them 4. He says they haven't gotten them yet. They need hundreds of them to win this battle, and that battle is really intense on the Eastern Front. The Russians are making slow but steady progress. I spoke to a hospitalier today. They're a volunteer group that go to the front line and bring injured people around there. They said that bridge, the third one that's been blown up now, has cut off access. They cannot get people out of Severodonetsk. The military governor of Severodonetsk said that the shelling there is so intense right now that the people that are hunkering down in the shelters just can't take it anymore, and it's having deep psychological effects on them. And they need to find a way out of there, because it's hell on earth for the people that are still trapped there.
Thank you, Ali. That was NBC's Ali Arouzi reporting. Now, as that show of unity took place in a war zone, there's been some friction in the Biden administration. Both Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have said the U.S. hopes to help Ukraine win, to weaken Russia. But we have learned that President Biden wants them to tone down that rhetoric. Now, the U.S. has not deployed troops to Ukraine and says it will not. Still, American fighters are volunteering to push back Russian forces. 2 of those fighters are missing, Alex Juki and Andy Tai Nak Win. Their families say they've not heard from them since last week. Let's continue now with NBC's Maura Barrett, who joins us from our Washington newsroom. Maura, what more do we know about these Americans who went missing?
Well, Joshua, there is still not a lot of information on their exact whereabouts, obviously, but we're talking about Alabama residents Alex Drueke and Andy Tynaquin, who you just mentioned. They're both former U.S. veterans who went to Ukraine in order to help volunteer to fight against Russia. Their families last heard from them last week, and it's suspected that they went missing after being most recently in Kharkiv. My colleague over in Ukraine, Molly Hunter, spoke with some of their families remotely about their concern. I want you to hear some of their conversation about where they think the two men went missing.
Said that there had been a mission and that it had gone bad. And after 36 hours, everyone had come back except Alex and Care Bear. He wrote and said, "I'll be going dark tomorrow and possibly the next day." And I wrote back, "Stay safe and I love you." And he wrote back, he wrote back, "I love you too." And that's the last I heard from him.
You can understand the family's emotion there, and we heard from a spokesperson at the State Department today who said that there is a potential for a third American veteran also missing, though we don't have an American citizen, but though we don't have specifics on the details of who that person might be. And now we also don't know, there's obviously concern about whether these veterans are potentially missing in Ukraine or if they could have been captured by Russia. Right now, we did reach out to the Russian Foreign Ministry, and they said that they have not been contacted by Washington, D.C. in relation specifically to these missing veterans at this time, Joshua.
So we'll see what the State Department decides to do. Obviously, you can tell she has got to be grief-stricken over all of this. Let me ask you about our exclusive reporting regarding President Trump trying to rein in a bit some of the comments from the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. What more do we know about that and whether or not the tone is going to shift from the White House?
Right, and so I think you might have meant to say President Biden talking with Secretaries Lloyd Austin and Secretary Blinken. He had a phone call, we've learned, and I want to shout out our amazing team here at the White House and across D.C. who led this incredible exclusive reporting about this unreported phone call. Carol Lee, Ken Delaney, and Courtney Kuby and Abigail Williams led this reporting, having had a dozen conversations with officials, current and former officials, and they learned that after the two secretaries visited Kyiv back in April, the president called them and said that he was disappointed in the rhetoric that they were projecting about their stance around Russia and the Ukraine war. Basically, and I want to read this quote specifically so that I get it right, but Secretary of Defense Austin had said at the time when they were visiting Kyiv, quote, "We have the mindset that we want to help Ukraine win, and we are going to do that." He added that they wanted to weaken Russia and so they wouldn't see any of these other types of unprovoked invasions going forward. And then at the time, Secretary Blinken had agreed with him. And so when President Biden called them after the fact, he said he was disappointed with the rhetoric and told them to tone it down because he thought it would set unrealistic expectations. This also comes as we learned that the Biden administration is a little wary around Ukrainian President Zelensky's firm stance on the fact that he doesn't want to cede any territories in Ukraine when it comes to negotiating to end the war. The president is very adamant that he does not want to pressure Ukraine in taking any steps either way or another, but that the United States is here to support Ukraine in whatever direction it wants to take.
All right. Thank you, Maura. That's NBC's Maura Barrett reporting from our Washington newsroom. Also tonight, we now know where the next Men's World Cup will be. Today, FIFA announced that the U.S. will host 60 matches. Mexico and Canada will each host 10 matches. The last World Cup in North America was in 1994. Brazil and Italy played the final match at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Brazil won in a dramatic penalty shootout. Los Angeles will host matches in 2026 at the much newer SoFi Stadium. Also hosting in the U.S., San Francisco, Seattle, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, Kansas City, Boston, Miami, New York, and Philadelphia. The host cities in Mexico will be Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Mexico City. Canada will host in Vancouver and Toronto. And pardon me, I think I said SoFi Stadium was in Los Angeles, Inglewood, California. Sorry about that. What can Twitter employees expect from their new boss, Elon Musk? He laid that out today in an all-staff meeting. We'll tell you when we come back. Since Elon Musk agreed to buy Twitter, we have had lots of questions about what that would mean for users. But what will it mean for the social network staff? Mr. Musk answered some of those questions today in an all-staff meeting. One big topic of conversation was his interpretation of free speech. He said that users should be able to say whatever they want on Twitter, including extreme views, as long as it does not violate the law. The topic of layoffs also came up. Elon Musk said in his words, "It depends," and that, quote, "anyone who is a significant contributor has nothing to worry about," unquote. After the meeting, a source told CNBC that most of the Twitter employees had negative reactions over Slack. I love that the social network of choice for people who work at Twitter is Slack. Mr. Musk has agreed to buy Twitter for about $44 billion. Let's dig into this with Tim Higgins, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and the author of Power Play, Tesla, Elon Musk, and the Bet of the Century. Mr. Higgins, welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So what was the goal of this meeting with Twitter staff, and how well was that goal met?
Well, it's an opportunity to hear directly from him of what he might be like as the boss if this deal goes through, as many think it will this summer. A taste of what he's going to be. We don't know if he's going to be the CEO, but he's clearly going to be the guy who's running the show. He's definitely even saying that he wants to have input and direct the product, and that is, what his history has been at Tesla and at SpaceX. So this is an opportunity to look at him, maybe not face to face because of this world we live in, remote, but they got to hear it directly and ask some questions.
Did this clarify anything for us significantly about what Twitter will be like under Elon Musk, or are there still big open questions?
Still lots of questions, right? I mean, it's clear that Elon, the way he's talking about the company in the future, he wants to have more than 1 billion users. That's more than 4 times the amount they currently have. He wants to generate way more money from subscription and not be totally dependent upon advertising to pay the bills. Yet he still wants to grow advertising revenue. He wants to turn the Twitter app into a payment ability. Think Venmo. He's really talking about Twitter almost becoming like this kind of central app, the app rule all apps, almost kind of like a WeChat in China, where it's a social media, it's a messaging app, but it's also a digital commerce app. And that's an idea that here in Silicon Valley has been, talked about for years. It's something that Facebook has been trying to do, but to talk about it is one thing, to enact it has been much more difficult here in the US. And it would be a huge win if he's able to do it, but also incredibly hard to pull off.
Yeah, as you were describing that, it sounds like he's trying to make Twitter much more like what Meta has become with Facebook and some of the other things that Facebook does. I mean, Facebook has a mobile payment system within that, Facebook Pay. I don't know how many people use it, but it's there. And Twitter has really struggled in the Jack Dorsey days to reach that higher level of growth. It's got currency, certainly cultural currency. The former president had a lot to do with that, but there always seemed to be this ceiling that Twitter could not quite break.
Well, you're hitting it on the head there, and that's been the frustration for a lot of investors for the last few years, and part of the reason why Twitter has essentially kind of always been on the block to be sold, because this underperformance, this belief that there was potentially more out there. When you listen to Elon Musk today talking about the app, talking about he wants this to be a free forum for all ideas, but not necessarily giving the reach to all of the ideas, right? He wants Twitter to be less boring, and he talks about. He points to TikTok is an example of something that's doing entertaining things in their venue and encouraging entertaining people to create that content. And so when you listen to him, you kind of hear this kind of maybe the railings for where he wants to take the app in the future. Much bigger ambitions, but also more entertaining. Because you have to think right now, one of the biggest entertainers on Twitter is Elon Musk.
With regard to that, he spoke not too long ago about what his Twitter presence is like. Here's how he characterized it. Watch.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm tweeting more or less stream of consciousness. It's not like, let me think about some grand plan about my Twitter or whatever. I'm like literally on the toilet or something. I'm like, oh, this is funny, and then tweet that out. I'm
not sure that's actually true. Because he has sent some tweets out that have shaken the markets. I mean, he sent a tweet out that said Doge, and all of a sudden Dogecoin went through the roof. He sent out a tweet regarding his, Ramira Flores in Texas, his Republican support, saying, quote, massive red wave 2022. So I'm not sure how genuine he's being in terms of his intent for who he would be within this ecosystem he's about to acquire.
Well, he's definitely one of the savviest, most sophisticated users of Twitter, almost like Donald Trump was, enabled to create a huge following of supporters and fans and help create his brand, help Tesla sell vehicles around the world. Yes, he's a power user, and he understands the power of the platform, and hence the reason he wants to control that platform, right? And so how it changes going forward, he probably has a lot of ideas. It's clear he has a lot of ideas on how to improve it. The question will be, will it improve it? And is that what users want?
At the top of your book, you ask a hypothetical question to readers. You write, quote, is Elon Musk an underdog, an anti-hero, a con man, or some combination of the three, unquote? That feels like the story of just about every mogul in American history. Like, that is the question to ask everybody, from the people at the Virginia Colony, the Virginia Colony Company, to Walt Disney and everybody in between. What is your sense of what we divine about what Elon Musk is, based on what we've learned so far about this acquisition, before we go?
Well, one of the challenges is he's got big ideas and he's a dreamer. He has delivered when it comes to Tesla, at least in some of those major goals. He's delivered with SpaceX. The question is, can he deliver with Twitter? And can he keep Twitter relevant? Because without that relevancy, he's also going to lose, right? He's going to lose money, but he's also going to lose some of his social standing and his ability to command that platform to reach all of those people out there that he talks to on a daily basis.
Tim Higgins is the author of Power Play, Tesla, Elon Musk, and the Bet of the Century. Appreciate you making time for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Why are groups of drag queens reading storybooks to America's children? Why not? Drag Queen Story Hour was created to promote reading and encourage diversity. You'll meet the group's executive director before we go. RuPaul once sang, "We're all born naked, and the rest is drag." You can learn a lot from a drag queen. Some have been teaching children to love reading through a nonprofit called Drag Queen Story Hour, and that has put a growing number of them under fire. On Saturday, a group of men shouted slurs during a Drag Queen Story Hour in San Lorenzo, California, that's southeast of Oakland. The men are described as members of the Proud Boys. The group shouted things like tranny, groomer, and pedophile. The Alameda County Sheriff's Office says it is investigating this as a hate crime. Meanwhile, Drag Queen Story Hours went on as planned in places like Montana and Idaho. One city attorney in Alaska said canceling the event could even be considered illegal. So what is Drag Queen Story Hour? Frankly, it's exactly what it sounds like. Drag queens reading children's stories to kids in libraries and bookstores and schools. It's a way of celebrating diversity and encouraging literacy. Joining us now is Ona Louise, also known as Jonathan Hamill, the executive director of Drag Queen Story Hour. Welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is amazing.
I would much rather be spending this time talking about Drag Race All-Stars, All-Winners. I would much rather be talking about that.
It's a different show. We'll host something else.
We'll do that some other time. But what's the conversation been like among you and other people in the drag community in light of everything that's been going on lately?
Right. Well, a lot of people who aren't members of the LGBTQ+ community don't realize that, sadly, this kind of hate and prejudice happens all the time. Now, we're just getting wind of it with this news, but it's always been a part of the queer experience, so sadly enough.
Talk me through Drag Queen Story Hour for someone who's never been. What would somebody notice that's different, that's unique, that makes this special and wonderful?
Yeah, so, Drag Queen Story Hour is exactly like it sounds. It's drag performers, kings and queens that read to kids in public schools and libraries and bookstores. Basically, wherever we can get kids and drag together, we read. And we spread literacy and love and acceptance. And we have over 50 chapters in the country.
How did Drag Queen Story Hour come about?
Well, it was first founded in 2015 in San Francisco, and it was led by a group of trans Latin drag queens. And it was founded by Michelle T., author and activist Michelle T., and it was born in the Castro Library. And from then, we've been going strong.
What are some of the reactions like? I imagine that some of the parents know exactly what they're getting when they drop their kids off for this story hour. Some perhaps kind of know, and then they realize what they're experiencing. What are some of the reactions like?
Well, I hope parents don't drop their kids off, because we definitely are not a daycare. Maybe there's a separate arm of our nonprofit. But you know, it's a chance for the parents to get entertainment enjoyment as well. But you know, drag overall is just an external extra layer of confidence and a persona you put on. I'm sure your outfit today is not what you wear on your day off or when you're on vacation. So we all put on an extra layer of fabulousness to gain a different perspective, and that's pretty much what drag is, and the kids love it.
With regard to the kids, I hear a lot of people express concern about what will kids think when they see, you know, men dressing like women or women dressing like men, people in drag. I have to say, having lived in San Francisco and having been part of Pride events before, when kids see drag queens, Leathermen, they have no context for what that is like an adult has. They think it's dress up. They think it's fun. What kind of reactions do you get from the kids? I presume they just think it's all fun.
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing about children in general is they have no filter. They say whatever's on their mind whenever. Usually the questions are, is that your real hair? Is that your real name? Why are your nails so long? Why is your jewelry so big? So, you know, just normal things that kids are curious about.
What would you tell a kid if they were like, why are you dressed up like a lady? What would you say to them?
I would say, I'm not dressed up like a lady, I'm dressed fabulous today. A big question we get is, why do you have a man's voice? And I'm like, oh, well, there's no such thing as a man's voice. You have a low voice and you have a high voice. And I have a lower voice. And kids are usually like, oh, okay. And then that's that.
Talk to some of the parents who are concerned, like some of the lawmakers in Texas and Florida who say that their concern is about having children at drag shows and exposing children to kind of sexualized content. Talk to the parents who may look at that and go, I don't know what to make, but that seems to be a valid point.
Yeah, anybody who has, who's been getting misinformation about our program or what we do, Drag Queen Story Hour is a children's literacy nonprofit. We read children's books, we sing children's songs, we do arts and crafts activities. We're in libraries and schools all across the country. There's nothing sexual about our program. A lot of people don't know the difference between sex and gender, and they get those kind of conflated and mixed up. And we don't talk about sexuality at all in our program. It's all about expression and kids experiencing otherness. Because they're going to grow up into the world, and they're going to meet drag kings and drag queens and non-binary people and people that come from different races and religions. And we're introducing otherness so they can be loving and accepting people and not spew hatred as an adult.
I appreciate you making that distinction about the difference between sexuality and gender, that there are drag queens who are gay, drag queens who are straight. A straight drag queen was rather controversial on Drag Race. Again, see, we need to have that conversation one day. But there's a difference between gender identity, who you see yourself as, and sexual orientation, who you see yourself with. Those are two different things that can overlap, but they're not the same thing. I know I got to let you go in a second, but we asked folks how they feel celebrating Pride this year in light of everything that's been going on. Sophia is one of the listeners, one of the viewers who responded to us, and here's what Sophia left in our inbox. Listen.
I am still going to celebrate. I'm still going to protest, but I am a bit more cautious. But I am not going to let these terrorists win. I'm a woman of color. My fight is their fight, and their fight is our fight. We are in this together.
Sophia, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. What about Pride for you this year in light of everything that's going on?
I mean, like, yes to Sophia. Like, let's get her on the show next. Yeah, I mean, you know, it is really scary time, but also, you know, we're here for a reason, and we won't have our queer voices silenced. And a lot of people are trying to legislate us out of existence with these bans and these laws that are coming in place. But, you know, we're here, we're queer, and queer people do exist in the world. So, you know, and we're not going anywhere. So we're going to continue our program despite what's happening and just add more glitter. So
everything's better with more.
Yes.
And any concerns about some of the groups that have threatened these events, like Patriot Front and others? How are y'all dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, we've always been met with controversy over the years with our program, but somehow this feels different. It's more organized on their end, and it has a lot of hate and violence attached to it versus peaceful protesting. So we're taking more precautious measures with our organization, making protocols and safety guides and making sure our storytellers and families having a safe, fun experience all Pride and all year.
My boyfriend would be furious if I did not ask you who you think is going to win Drag Race All-Stars All Winners.
Oh, I mean, I'm a big Jinx fan, so I don't know. I don't know. She's my girl. I guess it's the red hair. I don't.
Yeah, I'm Jinx. Shay's got a chance, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think they should sleep on Raja. Everything Raja has done is like every week she's impressed me, but conversation for now.
At the end of the day, they're all winners, so
exactly.
It's all good.
Exactly. Ona Louise, a.k.a. Jonathan Hamill, Executive Director of Drag Queen Story Hour. I'm so glad you made time for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, as we mentioned right now, obviously the LGBTQ community faces a number of threats. Well, tonight, my colleague Joe Fryer will take a deeper look at that. So stay tuned for Pride and Backlash. That's tonight at 10:30 p.m. Eastern here on NBC News Now. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us. Come on back tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.